since he was governor of this state for 14 years, or as he likes to say, he was governor of the 12th largest economy in the world for 14 years. And Secretary Perry, we're really pleased to welcome you to the platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Dan, thank you. It's a privilege to get to be home. Getting to work with Dan Yergin is a real treat. I refer to him as the godfather of energy, and he is. It's welcome to the energy capital of the world, to Houston, Texas. I think it's been a full year now since I became the U.S. Secretary of Energy, and during that time, I've gotten to travel a great bit. Many of you that are in the audience today, I got to spend time in your countries over the last year and talking to a lot of my counterparts and stakeholders that are here who we've worked together. I guess a year ago at the 2017 CERA event, and for those of you that were here last year, this city looks substantially the same as when you last gathered. If you drive around, it pretty much is just as sparkling and as vibrant, and that speaks volumes to this just remarkable resilience that the city has in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, a storm that took a number of lives, that destroyed or very much severely damaged huge numbers of home and property, displaced a lot of people, a lot of families across this region. And I will tell you, I could not be prouder. I could not be prouder of the Herculean effort that Houston and its people made during this incredibly monumental challenge. And they, won a world championship in baseball while that was going on too. So, yeah, it's been quite a year. And Dan, this annual gathering is often a platform for important announcements, and this year is no different. Just the other day, a vessel called the Meridian Spirit embarked from Sabine Pass with an LNG shipment to India. Just last week, an LNG tanker left Cove Point, Maryland, with its first shipment. These shipments underscore the Trump administration's desire to export more natural resources and innovation around the world. Just a few weeks ago, right here in Houston, DOE met with producers and midstream developers to identify the next generation of technologies to unlock more of our nation's natural resources. Whether it's carbon capture, developing new solar technologies, stepping up efforts on storage, there is a tremendous amount of optimism in the energy sector, and I think for obvious reasons. I've had conversations with a number of you who are energy ministers. I know my friend from the UAE is here. We spend a lot of time together over the course of this last year, and thank you, Skal, for being here with us today. Thought leaders. Those of you in the industry that are making economic decisions day to day. I think all of us can agree on a vital point, and that is this. Energy security is a roadmap to economic prosperity. It's a roadmap that our nation has tried to follow, though we've had some detours along the way. But today we have the opportunity to reaffirm a new direction. I call it the new energy realism. This new energy realism rests on the fact that America is in the midst of an incredible energy revolution, this energy progress that we're seeing here. It's due to a cascade of technological breakthroughs driven by innovation. America is producing abundant, affordable energy from a wider range of sources than we ever thought possible. And we're using this energy more cleanly, more efficiently than ever before. These advances they've got powerful implications both here and abroad. Taken together, our successes refute the old myths. They debunk these false choices that were before us. They transcend limitations, pointing the way to global energy security and shared prosperity. This dramatic progress is a decisive break from the 1970s, when America began pursuing, from my perspective, a fundamentally flawed energy policy, and we paid a huge price for those decisions. Those promoting this policy, they actually called it realism. Those who believed in it claimed that the days of energy abundance were over. It was said that we had a permanent energy shortage. It was said that even if we discovered new resources, new reserves, they would be too costly to produce or impossible to use without harming the environment. The solution that they proposed was a bleak one. We all remember that picture of Jimmy Carter sitting in front of that fireplace, talking about malaise, talking about draconian regulation of energy. These so-called realists couldn't have been more mistaken. Truth be told, we had no shortage of energy. What we had was a shortage of imagination and a loss of confidence in our ability to innovate. Clearly, if the naysayers weren't realists at all, what they were pessimists. They were pessimists who were blinded by the reality of America's innovative capabilities. And unfortunately, this blindness ruled in one of the least innovative places on earth, Washington, D.C., in a place that so obviously favored regulation over innovation. It was no surprise when the government used one thumb to promote a favorite technology, and on the other hand, they regulated those they didn't like. So how did America move from this perceived energy scarcity to unprecedented energy abundance? The answer is really pretty simple. It's rather clear. Beyond the Beltway, innovation was revived. Much of it was taking place. It was ongoing in our national labs that I have the great privilege to be able to work with on a daily basis. It was going on in states like Texas, where taxes were cut. Regulations were kept simple and transparent. They gave people both the freedom and the incentive to innovate. And with innovation came a revolution in energy technology. As a former governor of this great state, I'm proud that the major breakthroughs in hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, they had their central pinnings, if you will, in this state. In George Mitchell, in the historic natural gas boom. It began right here in this state. And as the U.S. Energy Secretary, I'm also proud of how our national labs help make those technologies become a reality. But other technologies as well, achieving breakthroughs that unleashed every energy resource that we had. You see, this approach has science and innovation leading the way, and the results have been spectacular. I mean, from fossil fuels to renewables, the supply rose, the costs fell, the efficiencies increased, and diversity blossomed. And something else happened as well. Our environment did not become worse. By nearly any measure, it became better, even as our economy expanded and energy development reached new heights. From 2005 to 2017, while the U.S. economy grew, we also led the world in reducing carbon emissions, cutting them by 14% over that period of time. So you see, the lesson's clear. We don't have to choose between growing our economy and caring for our environment. By embracing innovation over regulation, we can benefit both. And that is at the heart of the new energy realism. Over the past year, President Trump and his administration have brought this realistic view to Washington. And we're seeing the benefits. He's cut taxes, reduced regulation by historic numbers, putting Washington squarely on the side of innovation and investors. And this can only help the president's plan to spur the construction of more infrastructure. Tax reductions will cut a major cost of doing business, while his proposal to reduce the permitting process to just 2 years will give investors the confidence to provide the necessary capital and communities visibility on project completion. The president's also signed off on critical new pipelines. He's removed draconian oil and gas restrictions on responsible exploration. He's supported clean coal technologies, seeks to reinvigorate our civil nuclear energy sector. And under this administration, R&D efforts, they have enabled renewables. They made storage and energy efficiency a focal point and allowed them to remain critical elements in our overall energy and economic strategy. America is now on the cusp of energy independence. But the president wants to see this go farther. He'd like to share our energy bounty with the world and let the spirit of competition benefit consumers by providing more choices in the marketplace. Already we're sharing our natural gas. Last year we became a net natural gas exporter. Today we export LNG to 27 nations on 5 continents. We are increasing our coal exports substantially. These exports rose by an estimated 58% last year over 2016. That's according to the EIA. Last August, the first shipment of Pennsylvania thermal coal bound for the Ukraine left from a port in Baltimore. In the coming years, we're going to be exporting multiple fuels. And not only that, we will export the same technologies that made us a clean, abundant, and diverse energy producer in the first place. By exporting our energy, we can free our friends and allies from fuel dependence on sometimes nations that don't have their best interests in mind. And by exporting our energy technology and that know-how that goes along with that, we can help developing countries in Latin America and Asia and Africa create their own energy renaissance and harness more energy to improve the lives of their citizens. And that includes access to electricity. Michael, you realize there's over 1 billion people in the world that don't have access to electricity. We have a responsibility, I think a moral responsibility, to reduce that number substantially in the coming years. Now, there are some out there who aren't happy with us exporting this technology because they oppose most energy production, specifically that of fossil fuels, which comprise 80% of the world's energy uses and will continue You see, I fear that that's the mindset of the Paris Agreement. Its supporters promote renewable since they're zero emissions fuels, right? And listen, we support renewables. You're sitting in a state that created more wind energy while I was the governor than any other state in the nation. As a matter of fact, we produce more wind than but 5 countries. We support those renewables. Not only are renewables the ultimate clean fuel, they are inexhaustible by definition. And while studies show that even by the year 2040, fossil fuels will still comprise 77% of the world energy use. And I believe that continued technological breakthroughs, I think we can help defy that prediction. But here's my question. What are we supposed to do in the meantime? What's the alternative? What are the people without electricity supposed to do? Remember what we have done through technology. What we've not only produced more fossil energy with it, we've made that energy cleaner. And since we're making coal cleaner, and since our technology can affordably extract massive amounts of lower emission natural gas, we're likely to continue to reduce the overall emissions of our fossil fuels. That, again, is the new energy realism. Thanks to the amazing power of human ingenuity, innovation, we don't have to tolerate the intolerable. We don't have to accept hideous sacrifices that harm the poorest among us. As we progress towards zero emission as a goal, we can still reduce emissions without draining the growth out of our developed nations or dooming developing countries to a future of poverty and want. So, Let us reject the old energy pessimism and embrace the new energy realism. Let us unleash innovation both to improve what we have and secure the future that we want. Let us invest in emission-free resources like nuclear and hydro and other renewables, while at the same time making fossil fuels cleaner. We would welcome, and help lead for that matter, a global alliance of countries willing to help make fossil fuels cleaner rather than abandoning them. This not only will help nations diversify their energy supply, but it will also be a key in achieving energy security. And from that energy security comes prosperity, affordability, economic growth, rising opportunities, optimism, and most importantly, the freedom for each individual to pursue and achieve their dreams. Combining opportunity with the freedom to design your own energy future will enable the production of more energy from more sources, more affordably, and in a cleaner way than it ever could have in freedom's absence. It is by embracing this new energy realism that we will all move towards greater energy security and a brighter, more prosperous future. Let all nations embrace it, and the spirit of imagination and innovation that drives it, for their own sake and for the sake of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for that very vigorous exposition of the new energy realism. On behalf of everybody, thank you for that. Let me begin by asking you, within that, you were at the conclusion, you talked about the need for cleaner fossil fuels. What's DOE doing in terms of its focus on cleaner fuels?
I made mention of the national labs, and I cannot tell you what a incredible blessing it is to be able to get to work with these 17 labs across the country, and the brilliant innovators and Madam Ambassador, I got to think they're kind of like you. Wake up every day, really excited with the opportunity to be able to go do what you all are able to do, to affect people's lives, to have an impact and know that you're having an impact on your lives. And with that said, that's where I see some of the battery storage is a great example of it. And our national labs are working on some technologies, and we're seeing great progress. What I will suggest to you, my prophecy for today, is that we will attain that technology sooner rather than later, and it will be because of the work that goes on in the Department of Energy's national labs. That's just one example. The carbon capture. We worked with a number of our friends from the Middle East on carbon capture. We asked the Clean Energy Ministerial when we were in China to put those technologies into their queue, if you will, of technologies that are going to be going forward. So,
and you've put, I think DOE's putting money, additional money into that.
That's correct. And and money's important to the process. I don't get confused that you have to necessarily have more in a line item. I'm a big believer that you need to be efficient with how you spend your dollars. And anyway, it's an exciting time to be involved in the energy sector, obviously because of what's going on with our resources and what's happened in America, but it's also in the sector of renewables and what's happening there. Just an incredibly exciting time as we're seeing progress being made almost on a daily basis.
So how the President has laid out a concept for infrastructure. What's the role in terms of energy DOE that you're focused on?
Yeah, I'm totally biased here. I don't think there is a more important aspect of the President's infrastructure plan than the energy space. Obviously, the jobs that are created just in the LNG sector, if you will. I mean, it is, when you think about the jobs that are created in a rural North Dakota community, the pipelines that get built. When you go to Pennsylvania and you see the quality of life in people's lives because of the energy industry and the development of those natural resources, moving that around, the jobs that are created to build the infrastructure, the taxes that get paid into those communities. I mean, this is a powerful story that I think all too often doesn't get told about the energy sector and how it drives the American economy of the early part of the 21st century. And the President understands that instinctively, that to build that out, to build the ports, to build the electrical grid, to build the pipeline transportation, to build the LNG plants, all of that, you know, we may talk about a little later in this conversation about some visions that we have about developing the Appalachian region.
In fact, why don't we jump into that right now?
You and I have talked about this. I mean, as the governor of the state of Texas, particularly in August and September, one of my recurring things that crossed my mind if I woke up in the middle of the night, which I did from time to time, was a Category 5 hurricane coming up the Houston Ship Channel. Is a massively destructive event, cataclysmic, not just to this area, which it would be, but it would cause incredible long-term damage to the petrochemical footprint in this region, which would cripple this country. So from a national security standpoint, it made sense to me is where could you go duplicate that footprint in this country? And the Appalachian region came to mind. It's sitting on top of the Marcellus and the Utica, two very prolific gas formations. Building that footprint, duplicating, if you will, the petrochemical ability, not only would give the security to this country, but economically be a powerful tonic for a region of this country that Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, states that some might have thought that the grand economic days of their lives was in the past. I happen to think it's in the future with that type of vision that the President of the United States has for infrastructure. So, the tax reform that the President pushed through, the regulatory impact of his directions to people like myself, Scott Pruitt at EPA, Zinke at Interior, to make sure that here are the rules, you meet the rules, here's your permit. So that regulatory reform, and you couple that with the third thing of infrastructure, the powerful economic impact of those three things collectively. I'm not sure there has been an administration in a one-year period of time that has had as big an impact not only on the hard, clear effects that those have, but also on the psyche of this country. That our best days are ahead of us. They're not behind us.
Let me ask you another question. Digitalization of the energy supply system continues. You talked about hurricane risk. There's digital risk. What do you see between the relationship between government and private sector in energy working on cyber issues?
Yeah, it may be as important an issue. The Department of Energy has historically had that space statutorily required on the energy side of the sector from a cyber standpoint. There's a new office being stood up at the Department of Energy. It's called CERA, CESER, and it's a focus on cyber, the protection of the grid, the protection of all of those controls in that sector. One of the reasons that it's over at the Department of Energy is our focus and our investment in supercomputing. Now, this cuts across a lot of sectors, but as we become more adept, better, as we become more efficient in our ability to take massive amounts of data, process them, analyze them, as we go into the realm of machine learning, as we approach this frontier of artificial intelligence, as we go towards exascale computing, our ability to be able to find solutions and protections for those that would attack our electrical grid, for instance, or for that matter, a natural disaster. The industry is changing so quickly. When you have the introduction of renewables into our grid, as you see all of these different sources of energy, and how the movement of those with smart grids, this challenge is incredibly important. And it's one that this administration is very committed to. Obviously, standing up this office, the focus on protecting the electrical grid from both natural and or man-made events is very, very important to the future of not just this country, but to the world. We work with our friends around the world on this, whether it's those that our allies are really counting on us to get this right.
Right. Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for coming to share your thinking and the outlines of what's ahead with the new Energy Realism.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you all for coming and being a part of this today.
Thank you. That was great. Wonderful speech. Thank you. Let me just... I'm very happy now to welcome to the platform Ben Van Beurden, who is the Chief Executive Officer